Honor and shame. Most believe they are two sides of the same coin, seeing as both can cause a man or woman to act out of their nature. To seem honorable and noble to others, one might lay down their life, put themselves in the line of fire, and purposely endanger themselves to help their fellow man. They likewise put everyone else in front of themselves and their needs, wanting for little and asking for nothing, or at least that's what they allow themselves to outwardly show. The euphoria and pride one feels as being seen as honorable and purely good is unmeasured. There is a true sense of accomplishment and infallibility that comes along with it, as everyone sees you as simply good and seemingly overlooks your more negative attributes. They wouldn't do that. They're a nice person is a sentiment that often follows any complaint or issue spoken about them. Things that would be red flags or cause for concern in others are hand-waved. Because you are such a good and honorable person, the very idea of you having a negative quality is ridiculous. It's a minuscule and slight power, but it's power all the same. To continue to seem honorable to their peers and have that power of influence over others, that same person might do unsavory and incredibly dishonorable things. Any personal failing could be placed onto another, effectively framing someone else for a mistake, uncaring of what the consequence to that person might be. Lying, cheating, stealing, all done to continue to appear as a good person, are not entirely unheard of. In fact, that is the case more often than not. Those mistakes and small errors that they placed onto others or hidden out of fear, then slowly but surely snowball into massive lies and secrets that threaten one's entire reputation and public appearance. What started out as a small lie can quickly transform into such a damning scandal that if found out, all would seemingly be lost. The want to continue to appear honorable turns into the want to hide one's shameful and disgraceful actions, and likewise can cause someone to do the unimaginable. And that certainly is the case today. Welcome back to another episode of Dreading. Today we are going to talk about the case of GI Joe Gliniewics, a man who was so addicted to being seen as honorable and people thinking the best of him that he did the unthinkable. This topic was suggested by one of our subscribers, Jackie Marina. If there is a case you would like us to cover, please feel free to leave it in the comments below. And if you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe. With all that said, let us begin. Joe Gliniewicz was the man that everyone seemed to know, even though they could never put a finger on how they met. Joe was just that guy who it seemed like everyone gravitated towards, and everyone had a story about. He was boisterous, always the loudest one in the room, and always had some opinion that he just needed to tell you about. More than that, he was the guy who would drop everything to help someone, whether that meant moving into a new home, helping finance a new car, whatever was asked of Joe, he did it. Going out to eat was always annoying, his family members would state, because no matter where they went, there was always someone there that knew their dad and wanted to talk to him, or regaled the whole table with a story about how their dad had affected their life. In the town of Fox Lake, Illinois, he was a local celebrity, who everyone called GI Joe. Joe had garnered this nickname early in his life, as he decided at a very young age that he would dedicate his life to protecting the United States. He had a fierce patriotism in him, one that he felt made it his duty to protect the nation and the people he loved so dearly. He attended the Army and Military Academy, and after graduating from Antioch Community High School in 1981, enlisted into the United States Army, where he felt that he truly belonged. Joe took to the military like a fish to water, and immersed himself in everything he could. He trained as a military police officer, a drill sergeant, and a sniper, wanting to be a jack of all trades and make himself as useful to the military as he could. His goal was to make himself vital to the military, that if there was ever a promotion, he would be seen as the obvious candidate. He never said no to a challenge or task, and was always up for learning something new. Joe stayed an active member of the Army for 4 years, constantly raising the bar for himself and training, until 1985. When he decided to instead pursue a position in law enforcement while staying in the Army Reserves. It was then when Joe joined the Fox Lakes Police Department in Fox Lake, Illinois. The town itself was incredibly small, with the total population at the time coming in around 10,000 people, who had chosen to purposely settle in a small town 60 miles outside of Chicago. And much like with everything else Joe had done, he made it his mission to learn everything he could and make himself indispensable to the team he was on. Though he was originally assigned to be just a patrol officer, he made it a point within his first year to get certifications in SWAT and police dog handling, and to become a certified evidence maintenance technician. His superiors saw his potential and admired his clear drive to be the best policeman that he could, and within 1 year's time, he was promoted to sergeant. At the same time, Joe had met Melody Resetter, and the pair had quickly fallen in love, getting married in 1989. The pair would go on to have 4 children, Donald, David, Jeffrey, and Joseph, all of which revered their dad as their hero and role model. As his kids continued to grow, he wanted to foster their love of law enforcement, and what he did. He pursued the lead position of the Fox Lake Police Explorer program. The Fox Lake Police Explorers served as an after-school program that would train young teens who were interested in careers in law enforcement. According to exploring.org, the program offers young adults a personal awareness of the criminal justice system through training, practical experiences, competition, and other activities. Additionally, the program promotes personal growth through character development, respect for the rule of law, physical fitness, good citizenship, and patriotism. The training would often include staging crime scenes, participating in basic training programs, and ride-alongs with actual officers of the law. It was in this position that Joe seemed to really make an impact on the community, becoming a figurehead to many of the teens in the area. He garnered a reputation for being tough but fair, respecting the teens put in his care in a way that they often felt like no other adult did. He would listen to them without judgment and genuinely seemed to have their best interests at heart. From his position as the leader of the Fox Lake Police Explorers, he influenced countless young people into pursuing a military and law enforcement career, including his own son, Donald, who went by the name DJ. After 26 years in the military and 30 years on the police force, Joe had helped countless people and had created a name for himself in the small town. He had started to think about retirement in the next phase of his life. However, everything he had planned would quickly stall on September 1st, 2015. The day started like any other. Joe would set off to work early in the day, stopping at a Quick Mart to buy 2 packs of cigarettes. As he began to drive to the station, he suddenly stopped at an abandoned cement plant. His car and phone seemed to linger here for upwards of 30 minutes, until 7:52 a.m., when Joe radioed into dispatch, stating that he was pursuing 3 men who appeared to be up to something. He described 2 of the men as white and the other as black, and requested backup to the scene, seemingly unaware as to what was about to occur. Other officers quickly responded, but couldn't find Gliniewicz or any of the offenders he was chasing down. However, upon their arrival, they heard a distinct gunshot pierce through the area, and immediately knew something was deeply amiss. This was an incredibly small, tight-knit town, and to have a shooting, especially an officer-involved shooting, was extremely rare. They searched the area and radioed back to dispatch that shots had been fired, and by 8:09 a.m., just over 10 minutes since he called in for backup, the responding officers found Joe's deceased body, lying in the swampy terrain around the plant. It didn't appear that there had been much of a struggle, as most of the terrain remained unmoved. However, Joe's pepper spray and other various belongings had been scattered around the area, indicating that something had caused him to drop them, or he had somehow been disarmed. His radio, taser, and other items were all found within a few feet of where he lay dead. Likewise, his police uniform remained mostly untouched, still tucked in from earlier that morning when he had gotten dressed, without even the slightest sign that he had fought anyone. He had been shot twice, once in the torso, which had been stopped by a cell phone and his bulletproof vest, and a second time in the chest. Though the area he was shot the second time was likewise covered by his vest, it appeared that if someone had pulled up the vest and shot him directly under it, an action that made little sense to those who found the body. Why would anyone go through the effort to pull up his Kevlar vest instead of aiming somewhere he wasn't covered, especially if they knew they were on a time crunch? To most who had experience with crime scene investigations, it made little to no sense, but little thought was given to that, and most of the responding officers and personnel had known Joe personally, and were processing the crime scene while processing intense feelings of grief. Oddly enough, Joe's gun was also missing, leading to a large-scale manhunt for 3 men who were armed, dangerous, and had just killed a local hero. Though Fox Lake was an incredibly small town, they put everything they had into looking for the 3 men who had killed Joe. To them, this action posed as a real, tangible threat to their town, and they weren't going to sleep until they found the men who were responsible. Almost immediately, the entire town was urged to stay inside as word spread about what had happened to GI Joe, Schools were put on lockdown as the police and other agencies came together to search. Within the hour, they had set up a kill zone, a 2-mile radius from where Joe had been killed, that they searched meticulously, to the point of some officers passing out from heat exhaustion. Helicopters, drones, and planes were flown overhead, searching for 3 men who had taken the life of their fellow officer, and after a day of searching, they caught a break. On September 2nd, a woman by the name of Kristen Kiefer called into the local dispatch to state that she had been approached by 2 men, one black and one white. They wanted to know if she was going out of state and if they could hitch a ride with her. She rebuffed their advances, then they tried to steal her car, at which point she fled on foot. She immediately called the authorities, thinking that these 2 men could possibly be involved with the shooting that had taken place the day before. Quickly, most of the search effort was relocated to that area, in which Kristen indicated the almost carjacking had taken place. Officers searched the area, but found nothing, leading to Kiefer eventually admitting that she had made the whole encounter up, wanting to insert herself into the currently active investigation. Despite the police and other investigating agencies stating that it would be best for everyone to stay home in the midst of the search, the entire town of Fox Lakes refused, wanting to instead memorialize the man who had so deeply impacted the lives of everyone around him. His wife of 26 years, Melody, spoke to the large crowd that had gathered in her husband's honor and tearfully recounted how he had been her hero and rock for their years together. Other members of the community spoke about Joe, regarding him as a true hero and a figurehead in their small town. Many focused on how Joe had begun to discuss retirement, and in fact, September 1st had been the day after he could have retired from the service. They also brought up his time volunteering with the Explorers and impacting the lives of countless children in the area. But Joe's death didn't just impact the small town of Fox Lake. Something about how he had died in the line of duty caught the media's attention, and soon his death had taken on a new meaning. On September 3rd, the Chicago Bears dedicated one of their preseason games to his memory, and even more media outlets reported on the death as being a consequence of the war on cops, started by the Black Lives Matter movement. By the time of Joe's funeral, just 6 days after his death, thousands of people were in attendance, including the state's governor. People waved thin blue line and American flags during the 18-mile procession, and when Joe was laid to rest, many stated that he was a national hero. No one could have realized how truly wrong they were. Though it appeared that publicly, law enforcement and the governing bodies who were looking into this thought that Joe was an upstanding, amazing police officer who had done no wrong, almost immediately, something felt off. They quickly sent his mangled phone out to Quantico, hoping the FBI would be able to salvage the contents. Many of the crime scene investigators who had gone to the cement plant after Joe's murder stated that the scene felt entirely staged. Usually, in deadly altercations, there would be some sign of physical disturbance in the surroundings. The swampy terrain should have been trampled or indicate multiple parties being present, but as it was, it seemed like Joe had been the only one there. Secondly, the gun they had thought was missing was found, 3 feet away from Joe's body, indicating that whoever had killed him hadn't thought to disarm him, or at least take the gun for evidence. Thirdly, and seemingly most damning, was the fact that the coroner's report had come out days after the crime, and he had stated publicly that while he was assuming the cause of death was homicide, he couldn't rule out a suicide, an accident, or a homicide. His statements that the death could have been a suicide sent shockwaves through the community. Joe's widow and eldest son stood in stark opposition to this statement, saying that Joe would have never even considered taking his own life and had plans for his future, which most suicidal people wouldn't have made. They likewise went on Crime Watch Daily to admonish the coroner, stating him saying that what happened to Joe was anything other than murder was quote-unquote disrespectful, hurtful, and irresponsible. She also went on to state that President Barack Obama was purposely ignoring her husband's death, even though in similar instances he had called the families of other officers who had died on the job. She likewise implied that her husband's death did have to do with the Black Lives Matter protests, and that was why it was being ignored by the president. However, the investigation was about to take a turn that Melody could not have expected when the FBI returned the contents of Joe's phone, especially since it would end up implicating herself, and months after demanding acknowledgement from the then president, she would be indicted in crimes linked to his death. Despite having a pristine public image and being revered by the entire nation after his death, Joe was not the nice, gracious man that everyone stated he was. In fact, it seemed as if the entire town of Fox Lakes had purposely hidden the real Joe after his death, never talking about the multiple transgressions he had made in his life, transgressions that were alarmingly common, and painted the picture not of a military and police hero, but of a man who abused his power and thought he was above the law. Whether this was done purposely or not, it seems odd that directly after his passing, he was praised as an amazing cop, when there was plenty of evidence to show he was anything but. It was also made clear that his friend, Chief of Police Michael Bain, had purposely ignored and hand-waved a lot of Joe's actions, both because they were friends and he likewise took part in some of Joe's less savory habits. After Joe's death, his personnel file was released, and all of the things he had done throughout his storied career finally became public. And while the first 50 or so pages seemed to indicate that he was an amazing policeman, things quickly took a turn. It seemed that Joe had a tendency to ignore his commitments and opt out of his duties, clocking in just to hang out and get drunk. He had then been suspended multiple times for his behavior, but seemed not to care at all that much, and never really feared getting fired. There were also 2 incidents in which Joe had been found by his fellow police officers passed out drunk in his car with the engine on. In one instance, after his colleagues were able to wake him up and bring him back to his home, they had his car towed to a lot. When Joe had come to, he was unable to recall what had happened the night before after passing out at the wheel, and when he couldn't find his car, reported it as stolen. It was only when one of the responding officers spoke to him that he realized that he had simply blacked out and his car had been impounded. At that point, he was more irritated that the officers didn't bring his car back to his home than he was embarrassed that he had broken the law. For Joe, he didn't care if his coworkers saw him as a lazy drunk who refused to do his job. He knew he wouldn't be penalized, so he didn't care. But his drunken antics and his habit of ignoring personal responsibilities was just the tip of the iceberg. Though he had been suspended a handful of times for his flagrant tardiness and irresponsible actions, it was his threatening behavior towards his peers and the lack of care by his superiors that struck most who read the file. His behavior and negative actions were so widely known within the department that in 2009, a group of 11 police officers sent a letter to the mayor stating outright that Joe should be fired. It also implied that he had some sort of pull inside the department, which kept him from facing any sort of responsibility for his actions, and no other officer could have gotten away with the things he'd been doing. This is what was said. Mayor Irwin, we, the members of the Fox Lake Police Department, wish to inform you and the village board of certain situations which have occurred and require your attention. All members are doing their job. They are following all rules, regulations, policies, and procedures. However, morale within the department is at an all-time low, and personnel are doing just what they have to. The morale issue is what we would like to address with you. On many occasions, various members of the department have approached Chief Bain with information and complaints about Lieutenant Gliniewicz. Some of these complaints could have been violations of state statute. To date, the members of the police department have been disappointed time and time again with Chief Bain's lack of action. The following is a brief history of Joe's behavior. Received 6 5-day suspensions, 30 days in total, for an inappropriate sexual relationship with a subordinate. This officer also sued the department over this, and the village lost tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars defending themselves. Received another suspension for damaging part of the records management program within the department. Was accused of sexual harassment and making threats against a dispatcher. Matter was dropped by the dispatcher. Removed police records from the police department, and in a public place, conducted reviews of the reports, which included confronting officers about the reports. Observed by department personnel in bars eating pizza while on duty. Observed by department personnel with certain women, not his wife, visiting different establishments within the village. Various members of the department have been approached by bouncers from different establishments and advised that Lieutenant Gliniewicz has been escorted from the establishment in a highly intoxicated condition. Did not pay a bar tab at an establishment within the village that was in excess of $300. Various members of the department have been approached by bouncers from certain establishments and advised that Lieutenant Gliniewicz is becoming a nuisance because he was drinking in the bar after hours and would not leave, took his family on vacation to Wisconsin in his squad car, allowed several civilian vehicles to fill their tanks with gas at village pumps, allowed members of the Explorers unsupervised access to the police department, allowed an Explorer advisor that was arrested for DUI by the department unsupervised access to the department and the incomplete reports of the arrest, allowed members of the Explorer post to operate department vehicles, utilizes department equipment that should be on the road for Explorer training at the expense of officers on duty, allowed members of the Explorer post to dress themselves in garments bearing police, thereby misidentifying them as police officers, somehow obtained control over a certificate for a free tattoo that was donated to the department, used the certificate to obtain a tattoo while on duty, and the time was later charged as vacation or comp day after members approached Chief Bayan. On several occasions at different department Christmas parties, inappropriately touched women, grabbed their breasts, and complaints were made to Chief Bayan. Was found in an intoxicated position in public at or near an Antioch bar by the Antioch Police Department. There are allegations he was belligerent with officers who found him. On many arrests, the person being arrested has cautioned the officer about continuing arrest because they were personal friends with Joey, Lieutenant Gliniewicz, or Mikey, Chief Bayan. This is not an all-inclusive list. There are many other instances where Joe's behavior violates the department's rules, regulations, policies, and procedures. However, we feel that these examples will enlighten you. Chief Bayan's head-in-the-sand approach to dealing with Joe can no longer go on. It has destroyed morale within the department and affected everyone's attitude. It has brought us to this extraordinary point of informing you of this matter. It is our sincere hope that you will address this matter. We can no longer stand by and watch Joe violate rules and regulations, policies and procedures, and state statute, and remain silent. Our next step to resolve this matter is to bring it to the attention of the media, or see to it that the appropriate investigation agency is involved. During his time on the force, Joe had forced a subordinate into a sexual relationship, stating that it was part of her job and would help her move up in the department. She later sued the department, but due to faulty legal counsel, she wasn't able to go to trial. Likewise, Chief Bayan stated that Joe had done all the things that she accused him of, and admitted to all of it. He recommended Joe go to a sexual addiction counseling and have a 30-day paid suspension from the force. Neither of those things actually happened. It was also found that after his death, his desk in the police department had an unmarked bag of cocaine, seemingly for recreational use on the job. It was apparent with everything mentioned in his file that Joe was not the person that he was made out to be. He had issues that led plenty of parents who had left their children in his care to feel lied to and taken advantage of. Despite the personnel file becoming public, his widow and eldest son, DJ, continued to fight for him, stating that just because he had made some mistakes didn't mean he was a bad person. But then, the contents of his phone were sent to the police from Quantico, and they realized exactly what kind of person Joe was. In the 6,500 pages of text messages that had been deleted from Gliniewicz's phone prior to his death, Joe revealed himself to be a man who simply couldn't be told no or challenged in any significant way. Prior to his death, Lake Fox had hired a village administrator, Ann Marin. The position of village administrator was a relatively new one, and Ann had been hired to make sure everything was in order. She wanted to check each department and make sure all of the finances were straight and everything was accounted for. However, after checking the Fox Lake Police Explorer program and finding a bevy of items in their possession that seemed out of place, she asked Joe to take inventory of everything that had been billed to the Explorers program. She had asked other program directors to do the same, and for her, it was a fairly standard request. This proved to be a heavy ask for Joe, as he had spent his entire time as the head of the program stealing from them. He had used the funds that had been dedicated for the program to take him and his family on vacation with his wife's knowledge, and also to buy subscriptions to adult websites and get his morning coffees. If there was money in the account meant for the youth program he ran, Joe thought it was as good as his. When Ann requested to take a look at the books to verify that everything was above board, she became Joe's biggest adversary. In a message that was sent to an unnamed Fox Lake representative, Joe said, "Between you and I am having a great deal of problems with our new village administrator. I've had a talk with the chief and he agrees with me. Does the police department have to be the sponsor for the post? I've done some research, and it's not evident anywhere that a law enforcement organization has to sponsor an LE post. In fact, I've seen 3 at competitions that were sponsored by other entities, and even an FC. Thoughts? He followed that up with a text that said, "Yes, I'm working through that issue today and through the weekend. We have a new village administrator that is a power monger and is trying to control everything in the village. We are all looking at our PD retirement options, and I need to move out of that span on control, at least till this person's contract is up." Again, at this point, all that was asked of Joe was that he take inventory of his purchases using the money that was intended for the Explorer post. To him, though, Anne was a power-hungry woman who wanted to make him personally suffer. Melody seemed to agree with her husband as to Anne's evil character, and felt as if the money that the pair had spent was indeed their own, as seen in this conversation. Melody's identity was kept private originally, which is why she is referred to as individual number 1, but in her own later trial, she was publicly named. Joe says, "I talked to him again and now thinks this is a knee-jerk reaction, and that when we put in our 2 weeks or set a retirement date, then he will move it." Melody responds, "OMFG, and in the meantime, she can do what she wants fucking A. Maybe seeing as we are on 503C, she can't touch the money, and maybe a letter on file from Bayan stating all is our and the PD and village have no claim." Joe then replies, "Nope, as long as we are sponsored by the PD, and after she makes the village structure change, she will have the means and ability to do as she wishes." Melody then asks, does he understand that? And maybe we need to hide the funds somehow. But Melody wasn't the only person of the Gliniewicz family that seemed to be aware of Joe's spending and partaking in it, as his eldest son DJ, the one who had gone on True Crime Daily with his mother to lie about his father, was also shown to have spoken to his father about misappropriating funds, as well as used some of the money himself. In a text conversation he had with his son, Joe once again spoke ill of Anne, writing, "She hates me, and I've never said more than 3 sentences to her the years she's been here. Hate the Explorer program, and is crawling up my ass and the program. Chief won't sign off to move it to American Legion, and if she got a hold of the checking account, I'm pretty well fucked." In response, DJ, who had followed in his father's footsteps and joined the military, responded, "Hopefully she decided to get a couple of drinks and gets a DUI. Joe responds by writing, "She does, but not around here, and no one knows where. Trust me, I've thought through many scenarios from planting things to the Volo Bog, which contextually means he has planned to kill her because she asked for him to account for public funds that he was misappropriating." On a separate occasion, Joe outright stated that his son was also using the money from the Explorer account, writing, "You are borrowing from that quote-unquote other account. When you get back, you'll have to start dumping the money into that account, or you'll be visiting me in jail." It was also found that Chief Bayan, the man who had hand-waved all of Joe's transgressions throughout the years, might have also stolen money, or at the very least, had been aware that Joe was, as Joe texted him complaining about Anne and commiserating that his life was over because she wanted him to do inventory. Via Facebook messages that had likewise been recovered, it appeared that Joe wasn't just thinking about planting drugs on Marin and killing her himself. He was also thinking about putting a hit out on her. In one message, he alluded to contacting a known gang member in the area and asking him to take care of the problem. When this was found, the gang member was brought in with his lawyer and claimed he knew nothing about it, though many believe he was covering his own ass. To investigators, it had become clear as to what had happened, and all the nonsensical issues that they had found at the crime scene began to make sense. Knowing that Anne Marin was going to uncover that he had stolen upwards of $60,000 from the police explorer's post and ruin his reputation, he decided that he would die a hero's death. In his mind, looking into the misappropriated funds would be considered inappropriate if Marin were to continue her investigation after he was savagely killed, therefore alleviating any blowback on his family for their part and saving his good name. By making it appear he was murdered on the job, his family would have access to his pension and be supported by the police department, no questions asked. The department would likely honor him as a fallen brother, and even if they were to discover that he had used the funds selfishly, they wouldn't let that tarnish his memory now that he was gone. Joe had spent a good portion of his career working for the police explorers and staging fake crime scenes for them, so he knew how to properly set a scene, or at least he knew how to make a scene look believable for children. He pretended to go about his day as usual, stopping for cigarettes before getting to the cement plant. He spent 30 minutes throwing his personal items around and trying to make it appear that he had been attacked by 3 individuals. He then radioed for help and shot himself once in the torso, breaking his phone, hopefully beyond repair, and knocking the wind out of himself. He then waited until he heard reinforcements arrive, then pulled his bulletproof vest away from his chest and shot himself. He dropped the gun, stumbled 3 feet, and then fell, dying before anyone could reach him. For Joe, being held accountable for his crimes was a burden too big for him to bear. He wanted to die a hero, and die the way he believed everyone else saw him. He thought, irrationally, that by dying, he would be saving his wife and eldest son from being implicated in his schemes. But, as we all know, that wasn't the case. Melody was indicted mere months after her interview with True Crime Daily for dispersing charitable funds without authority and for personal benefit, and 2 counts of money laundering. She pleaded not guilty to these charges, and stated that despite the text messages of her acknowledging that Joe and her had used funds from the Explorer's post, she had done nothing wrong. Likewise, the prosecution also had a video of Melody that had been taken shortly after her husband's death. In it, she acknowledged knowing that they were using funds from the Explorer post to pay for vacations and other material goods, but clarified it wasn't that bad, seeing as she made sure that they always paid the money back. She was quoted as saying, "People want to go, that's embezzling funds. No. Not when you pay it back. Every time he borrowed money, he'd let me know, and I'd write it down." However, directly after it was made public that the text messages between her and Joe would be allowed in court, Melody accepted a plea deal and was convicted of a deceptive practice, which is a Class 4 felony in Illinois. After taking the plea, Melody stood up in court and claimed that she never took a penny and is innocent of all charges, but just pled guilty to put all this behind her.
And take full responsibility. And knowing at one point my husband was commingling his funds with the Explorer account. When my husband would ask me to write a check back to the account, I would do that. And the Explorer program was a central part of our lives. I came on so that the females that were in the program would be able to participate in competitions. I loved the kids who came through the program as they were, and many still are, what I call my bonus kids. I enjoyed seeing them use the skills they had gained in the program in their adult lives, the things I would have wanted to sorry, sir. The last thing I would have wanted to see was the program that had enriched so many young lives. And I would write checks to the Explorer account because the alternative of inaction would be worse. Is what I did prohibited the money that was donated to the program from the donors. Any other result would be unacceptable to me. I didn't know my husband was commingling his own money into the Explorer account until he asked me to write a check back into the account. And I never knew the full amount that he was commingling until after his death. In regard to the Hawaii trip, I didn't know my husband was planning a surprise honeymoon until I discovered it in April 2014, that he had deposited $7,000 into my account to use for the trip. When I asked my husband where the money came from, he told me he took a loan out on his retirement account through work. I didn't know the amount of the loan, and I didn't even know where he had deposited the loan to. But at some point, After the trip, my husband asked me for an additional check to be written to the Explorer account to offset what was spent. Again, I paid the amount to prevent it from becoming a theft and to protect those donations that were made to the program. The one and only time I ever personally made a transaction on the Explorer account was at my husband's instructions to purchase an airline ticket to bring our son home for a funeral for a former Explorer program who had passed away in a horrific car accident in May of 2015. The deceased Explorer was one of my son's closest friends, and the family had requested that my son be there to serve as part of the honor guard with the rest of the Explorer Post, who did the same. I'd like to make it clear, I never took a cent from the Explorer Fund, no matter what has been recorded. Life since my husband's death and this prosecution has not only affected my life, but those of my children. All of us have been subjected to a litany of death threats. The media not only released our address and our phone number, but for good measure, they released my social security number and my driver's license number, resulting in a multitude of my accounts being breached. Further, I received notification from my bank that they decided they were going to cancel my credit card because per them, doing business with me was a reputational risk to their company. But they took it further, and they shut my savings and checking account down, and then turned around and shut the savings accounts and checkings account down of all my children, preventing them from getting their funds from their direct deposits through work. And as hard as I've tried, and I have filled out more job applications than I can count, I am still unable to obtain employment just because of my name. But I think the worst is probably the continual desecration of my husband's grave. And there have been many times that we arrive and everything is broken and strewn about. But I think the worst was when I took my youngest son, and as we approached, yet again, everything was broken. And then there was a knife stabbed into his grave. At this point, all we can do is continue to clean it up because we know it's going to keep happening. Perhaps people will disagree with how my husband managed finances, which is the crux of the matter here. And I will note there is a difference between malice and a lack of skill. But please, let his final resting place be a place to bring peace to his family and loved ones. I ask your honor to consider all of this in your sentencing and to allow me to move.
She was recently sentenced to 24 months probation As for his son, Donald, he wasn't charged with using the funds from the Explorer Fund, as there was apparently not enough evidence to do so. However, text messages went on to show that his father set up a sham marriage between Donald and Joe's own mistress so they could receive better benefits, and it appears as though DJ had been dishonorably discharged from the military. Joe was a terrible person who spent years abusing his post and taking advantage of others, all while being supported by the people around him. He was allowed to get away with almost everything his entire career, and the moment he had to be accountable for his own actions, he instead did what he did best, and lied. Oddly enough, because Joe had been so revered in the press and in the town of Fox Lake, some people believe that Joe, Melody, and DJ were set up. They have created a conspiracy around this case, claiming that the media is withholding evidence and lying about who Joe was, as they knew him, and he wouldn't do what they said he would. However, 20 years of complaints, lawsuits, and physical evidence of his actions speak louder than their theories. Thank you so much for watching today's video, and thank you most of all to our subscriber, Jackie Marina, who suggested it. Again, if you have video suggestions and want to see us cover a case, please leave it in the comments below, or feel free to shoot us an email. If you have made it this far, please like and subscribe, and remember, stay safe.